celebrate by doing a top 10 list, kind of like David Letterman used to do on his show. Top 10 things a mom doesn't want to hear. Number 1, I swallowed a goldfish. Number 2, your lipstick works better than crayons. Number 3, does grape juice leave a stain? Number 4, the principal called. Number 5, but Dad says that word all the time. Number 6, what's it cost to fix a window? Number 7, has anyone seen my earthworms? Number 8, I painted your shoes pretty, huh, Mom? Number 9, the dog doesn't like dressing up in your clothes. And number 10, a mom doesn't like when one of her kids says, I'm moving out. I'll say most of the time a mom doesn't like when one of her kids says, I'm moving out. All the time, actually. So that's just a fun little thing to get us talking about moms. And I've been led to talk about a lady in the scripture that I honestly have never used in a Mother's Day sermon before. And it's Rahab. Rahab from the Old Testament. Now, Rahab, if you don't recall, or maybe you've not heard the story, was a prostitute. Not the kind of woman that you would ever think would be the subject of a Mother's Day sermon. But she's great. I'm going to give you the basic story. This is the Cliff Notes version, although kids don't use Cliff Notes anymore, they use Schmoop, in case you're wondering. This is from Joshua 2, and it goes like this. Joshua is preparing to obey God and lead the people into the promised land, knowing full well that they would face military opposition. So he sends some spies into the land to scout it out before the children of Israel enter in. They arrive at the city of Jericho and go to the house of a prostitute named Rahab. Somehow the king of Jericho hears about these spies and sends soldiers to arrest them at Rahab's house, but she hides them, lies to the soldiers, sending them out on a wild goose chase. She then makes an agreement with the spies to spare her children, and her family when the Israelites come and take the city. And she helps them escape and return to Joshua with their report. That's a very brief accounting of the story, but it's enough for us to understand the references I'm going to make to this woman, Rahab. And interestingly, Rahab is mentioned 3 times in the New Testament. That's a big deal. And we're going to look at each one of those places in the New Testament where Rahab is mentioned. The first one is Matthew 1:5, and it's in the middle of a bunch of names. It's Salmon, the father of Boaz, whose mother was Rahab, Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth, and so on and so on. And at first glance, this may look like just a simple list of names, but what it is the list of the lineage of Jesus. And right smack dab in the middle of that list is our Old Testament heroine, Rahab. Now, you see, Jesus, not only was he direct descendant of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and really big wig kind of people, he was the direct descendant of a prostitute named Rahab. Now, it's interesting also to note that Rahab wasn't even an Israelite by birth. She was pagan. But here she is in the list of the kings and patriarchs and wealthy and important people who were Jesus' ancestors. And for a woman to make this list, oh my goodness, that was completely unheard of, countercultural, and shows just how revered and how important she is in the story of our Messiah. So Matthew is honoring Rahab And really, that's what we're about today, honoring people who mother us. We've all been mothered in some way. Maybe you've not had a good mothering experience, but I bet if you look, there's somebody in your life that has fiercely mothered you. And if all else fails in the human realm, I think realm is hard for me to say, we have to understand that God is beyond all of our gender classifications, and that God has fatherly attributes, but God can also meet that mothering need that we have. He's fierce, he's loyal, he's unconditional, he's merciful. Oh, his love. He weeps and cares and wants relationship with us. That's all traditionally characteristic of a mothering person. But it can be anybody. It can be anybody. Okay, the second place in the New Testament where we find Rahab mentioned is Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11. And I'll give you a second. What's this called? Anybody know? It's got the Faith Hall of Fame in it. And if you look at Hebrews 11:31, let me turn there. You will see that it says, by faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, but she received the spies in peace. By faith. By faith. This pagan, not Israelite woman is listed in the Hall of Fame, the Faith Hall of Fame. Now, this very point is significant because it says that she was a woman of faith who was highly honored. And it's especially astounding when realizing that she was living in Jericho and she knew that the Israelites were going to come in and everybody was terrified and there was going to be a war. And she chose to follow Yahweh. Now, she should have looked at these spies as the enemy. She should have turned them over to the authorities. But in Joshua 2, we hear her words. I know that the Lord has given this land to you, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt. Oh, we heard that. And what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Ammonites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. We've heard it. We've heard of it. Our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. Do you hear that? Did you hear that? Rahab said, for the Lord your God is heaven. Your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. We have Rahab's profession of faith. Now, she turns from the belief of her culture and embraces God, Yahweh, as the true Lord and God. Now, I just love Rahab and her honesty. What else can we see about this profession of faith? She heard about what God had done, and she responds in faith. And at this point, she had not experienced any of God herself. Oh my, what faith is required to step and follow God without having experienced it first. She didn't have firsthand knowledge of the gods of Israel, his power, his might, and his holiness. She'd only heard the reports, and yet she recognized the truth and she embraced it. That's why she's listed in Hebrews 11 in the Faith Hall of Fame, because she believed first and then experienced God's deliverance. And that is real honesty. I mean, how many of us Say, God, show me you're real, and then I'll believe. God, do this for me, and I will put my faith in you. She said her people had heard the reports and were terrified. And they fought anyway, and they were beaten. But she believed and sided with God. And I want to throw this out as a challenge. Where do you need to take a leap? Where do you need to take a leap of faith to believe without having that experience first? To believe and to trust that God's going to show up because he's faithful. To believe first. To act first. We like to say, okay, God, you work all the details out and then I'll trust you in this situation. That simply is not faith. Faith is saying, okay, God, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to trust you anyway. Amen. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I know that you have my best in your heart, and I'm going to trust you anyway. Sometimes we know who he is because of our own experience. Sometimes we know who he is because of what we hear from other people. She believed, then God delivered. That is a step for us to believe and trust first, and then watch with excitement and see what God does. See what God does. Matthew, Hebrews 11, and then James 2:25. You may want to write these three texts down. You can take them this week and revisit them. Matthew, the first chapter, Hebrews 11, and James 2. So the final mention in 2:25, it says, in the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction. Oh, James, you're showing us a different angle. He's showing us that faith is balanced with action. Hebrews praises her faith, and James praises her action. The argument that James is building here in the entire chapter, second chapter, is that faith, which is not accompanied by action, is, and if you look in verse 26, faith without works is dead. So in that chapter, he gives two examples. Abraham, he was faithful and his actions showed it. And Rahab is the second example. She was considered righteous because of her actions. Do you see? Rahab believed. She had the words right. She understood who God is. And then secondly, she acted in accordance with her beliefs. She hid the spies. She gave them information. She sent them off. They went and they equipped themselves, and they were able to come back and have a mighty victory as they took the promised land, which was promised to them. She acted on her belief, and this lesson for us is that mothers and others, it certainly applies to all of us, we need to live lives that match our words. What is it? Don't believe what they say, believe what they do. You know a person's true character not by what they say, but by what they do, how they live what they say. Oh my, Rahab, how wise you were. There's a story about 4 preachers discussing the merits of various translations of the Bible. One liked the King James Version because of its simple, beautiful English. One liked the American Revised Version because it was closer to the original Hebrew and Greek. Still another liked a contemporary version because it had updated vocabulary. The 4th minister was silent for a moment, and then he says, I like my mother's translation better. Surprised, the other 3 men said they didn't know his mother had translated the Bible. Yes, he said, she translated it into life, and it was the most convincing translation I've ever read. Woo! Amen? Now, Rahab was a prostitute. And one of the biggest lessons from her life is that God can use anybody, anytime, anywhere. And she is honored by the Jewish community. She's in the Jewish Encyclopedia. They celebrate Rahab, and she's not even a Jew. And the Jewish tradition speaks that they think she actually married Joshua. You see, when God came into Rahab's life, she became more known for her faith than her past. Isn't that just like God, to use the lowly, the despised, the abused, to glorify his kingdom, to exalt them in places when they respond in faith to him? I find that so encouraging that God can use someone like that, with that kind of past, for his kingdom. If he can use her, he can use you, and you, and you. And our past becomes irrelevant once we take that step of faith to God. A lot of people have a lot of feelings around Mother's Day. Maybe you didn't have a great mom. Maybe you want to be a mom and can't. Maybe you are grieving your mom today. I just want to say that we can be grateful that we have the opportunity to mother people with our own lives and our faith and our actions. We can honor those mothers who were faithful. And even if we're not women, we can be motherly to others. We don't have to keep this whole motherhood thing in one little box. Honor and proclaim those who mother you today. Realizing that God is waiting to embrace you as a mother and a father in his loving arms. To know you is his greatest desire and joy. God knew you and created you for the power and the blessing of knowing you. Respond in faith to him today. Put that faith into action. And let's celebrate. In Jesus' name, amen.